No, I mean with your phone.
Yeah, but we're recording. We're on the podcast.
Oh, I see. Oh my God, the podcast has started.
So today we are here with my dear friend, collaborator, almost a brother, I'd say. And we have him to thank for this beautiful new setup. Like, one secret confession I have is I've always had this dream of being a talk show host. Like, I almost get more excited about that idea than I do about being a film director. And I've always admired these old, like, 60s and 70s talk shows. And I thought there was no room anymore for that kind of thoughtful, slow, unhurried discourse that you would hear in that medium. And now we have it again because of podcasts.
Yeah.
And even though we live in this ADD world, there's this one huge exception to that, which is people will listen to like unedited, hours-long conversations.
Yeah.
And Gallo and I have shot so many interviews because we've collaborated, as he's been my cinematographer on all my films. And we've done probably hundreds of documentary interviews, but we've never sat down and talked to each other. It's kind of crazy.
That's true, yeah.
Like, we've never interviewed one another for anything.
That's true. Earlier today, I was thinking, Tao's probably about to learn a lot about me and possibly me about him, like during the podcast.
I think so. I think it's a great way to... in the 60s, there was this idea of cinema verite, like we should just film as if the camera wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And there was this kind of... It seemed like an ideal thing. Like, we're going to hide the camera and have it be... We're going to try as much as we can to get what it would be like if it was real. But it really quickly became apparent that that was not possible. People are very aware of a camera. And then there were some filmmakers in the 70s who said, why don't we do the opposite? Why don't we see the camera as a catalyst for a deeper truth that wouldn't otherwise emerge? And acknowledge the fact that it's a really strong presence. And then people will reveal themselves in a way that maybe they wouldn't. And I think that's what happens in these conversations. Mm-hmm. Like, if I said to you, yesterday you were with Alessandro and chatting for 2 hours, I can't do that. I can't just sit down and talk to somebody for 2 hours, but on the podcast I can.
Right.
And it's exciting to be able to like sit down and say this weird scenario.
You're using this as a vehicle to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell the story of how we met and a bit of the background of our like working relationship before we go into your own personal story a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I also want to comment that I think it is interesting that, we have done hundreds of interviews together, and that's an interesting philosophy and concept that both of us are looking in this direction. Yeah. Right. We're always looking to go inward towards the camera. I'm thinking about the lighting and the setup, and you're about the questions, and then we collaborate. Like, what else do we do to do the story? But we rarely will then look at each other also, and so it's
but this kind of fraternal like relationship has grown over the years in a very kind of subtle but marked way. Yes. I think like we always had a kind of slightly competitive, slightly just fraternal vibe. We both have like, I think, Italian American background. We both have that bit of ego probably, used to being the alpha male. And yet we found this kind of amazing way to kind of complement each other. I think
it's our love of the flamenco and vintage vehicles and trailers, and we share so many different,
and the desert
and so many different
and
projects.
Just a general curiosity. I mean, Gallo is... And then we have huge differences too, which I think complement each other in nice ways. Gallo is very meticulous, thorough, attention to detail, where I'm kind of more of a hurricane coming in like, let's do this. Yeah. And so that's why when we setting up this as a proper like TV studio, as I was dreaming, is making me so happy that we were able to do this together now as our latest little collaboration.
Exactly. I love our constant collaborations, and in the collaborations, it's true. I'm thinking lighting, framing, this and that, more meticulous. And the one thing I appreciate about you, at the beginning was difficult, because you would just come in and it was all about aesthetics and just like starting and this and that. And I would fight against that at the beginning, but then later, matured into just understanding oh, this is Tao's greatest, I've often told you your greatest gift is your enthusiasm. Your enthusiasm is infectious, and it gets everybody on board like that. And I would be crazy to try to stop that in some way. I just need to be ready or surrender to filming as is. Sometimes it's like a big lesson in life, kind of, is like, they always say lighting is never finished, only interrupted. So
yeah,
you try to get it, you get it. I would try to get it as close as I could for you, so that when you came in with all of the energy, we could start, right away and keep that kind of enthusiasm going.
I think that's an adapted saying from a poem: is never finished, only abandoned. So the like all creative things, you have to just at some point just let go. And as a cinematographer, I guess you're always having to you have so many other things in mind. I mean, so many other factors are coming into play in terms of like natural light changing, schedules, budgets, a whole other team of people. And it must be frustrating on a deep level to have to make compromises all the time, or no?
Well, I think, if you want to be a working DP, you also have to be a philosopher and a diplomat and a shrink. And, because half of my job is making sure that I'm super creative with you, and we're having that creative conversation, and we've done that creative pre-production and what we're going for. And the other half is keeping it silent from you, that the AD and the producer want to know how fast it's going and when we're going to be done and how much we're going to get in the day and the hours, and can I go look at the next location. And so there's that balance in between. And then you're running the Grip Electric crew also, and
I mean, mind you, I should say Gallo is a very accomplished cinematographer, otherwise known as director of photography. The work we've done together is a tiny percentage of the hundreds of commercials, music videos, feature films, documentaries that Gallo has done. And obviously, when I say fraternal, there's also you're a little older than me, so there's a big brother type dynamic too. And whereas I'm a little all over the place doing podcast and music and Bombay Beach and film, like you've been incredibly focused your entire life on this very specific, singular craft, which I have huge admiration for. So why don't you, so let's go farther back, since you didn't answer my question about how we met. We'll get to that later. Why don't you tell me why you became a cinematographer and how that happened? Because I've actually never asked you this.
Well, I'll let you know also that my singular focus on cinematography, as your older brother, and the more responsible one of the family, I had 3 kids. Yeah. You didn't.
I have none.
There's a huge difference. Like when you have the responsibility of a family, man, you have to work. I wasn't able to go off to Italy or how many boat trips, ski trips, and fun adventures did I miss because I had to work. I had a family. I couldn't just leave them. Now, Luca, I've known you, I think, must be 17 years or something like that, because I think Luca was like 5 or 6, and now he's 22. So I just finished my first, beginning of another adventure. We spent so much time together in Bombay Beach. Was never able to do that before. But
we just came from 3 months in Bombay Beach, and then which usually we'd be setting up the Bombay Beach Biennale in that time, but we decided to just do it anyway, even though there was no Biennale because of COVID. And now we've moved back to the high desert, and we're in my old garage, which I've slowly turned into this much more elegant, dark, woodsy, cozy studio, with partly in mind the possibility of doing this, which is exciting.
So that, the cinematography, first of all, the cinematography comes from, I had a kind of like misspent youth. I was like the child of a divorced parents at a young age, around 13. And so, they didn't handle it very well then. There wasn't as much information about time sharing and what you're supposed to do and whatnot. So I just thought life was over, and it was just, live fast, die young at that point. It was all.
Where'd you go?
This is just outside of DC, close to Olivia's farm, actually. And, I'm born in New York, and then we moved to DC. Both my parents work for the government there, and it was pretty live fast, die young kind of mentality there. It was all about the friends, no more family, and just go hard. Motorcycles, a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. And then,
what did your parents do for the government?
My mom worked for Senator Warner of Virginia, and my father worked for the Department of Defense. But I was like, when I was later in life, I was also thinking, how did we never go to my father's office? Like, we would go downtown, we'd go to the Capitol, we'd go to the Senate, and I was like, did my dad work for the CIA? How do we never go to his office ever? It just seems strange. We were constantly in D.C. hitting museums.
And you still don't know what he actually did?
I mean, he said he worked for the Department of Defense. He also worked for like Denison Copiers. And then, I don't know. Afterwards, like when I was older and I thought about it, I always thought that was so strange. How we never went down to the Department of Defense? You could have your family in there at some point, no? I mean, D.C. is a strange area. It's all khaki pants, blue shirt, Honda driving, like CIA guys. They're just regular looking people that are doing like a job in their mind for the betterment of the country. You know, they have that kind of like mentality.
So you're a rebellious teenager. Is that what you're hinting at?
Super rebellious teenager.
Yeah.
And but I will say that my mom took us to the Smithsonian so often. And anytime the family came down from New York and New Jersey, we were always at the Smithsonian's. And I think that through osmosis, I was going into these giant buildings with so many people in them and seeing like all these important works. And the works were constantly changing also. That in my mind, I think what it was telling me was that just down the street from the White House, where the president lived, were these giant museums. And that how important an artist's life is. I think that was I really feel like that was the underlying message I was getting that I didn't even know about until I got older, until I actually left DC and walked into some little rinky-dink museum. And the guy was like, it's $7, donation fee. I'm like, you don't pay to go to a museum. I never paid you this Smithsonian. You just walk right in. I'd never paid before. And I was like, for this is like just this one room. And in that moment, I realized, oh, wow, what an important gift I received, when I was young, because also we went there when I was young so much, so it was very impressionable. And then as we got older and we became more rebellious, we would go there as teenagers to skip school because you always looked like you were on a field trip. Oh. So we would skip school, we'd go down there, we'd smoke a doobie, and then we'd go see like this film called To Fly at the Air and Space Museum, which was unbelievable. And you could go see the rockets, and then you go over to the Natural Gallery, the Portrait Gallery, and see all these amazing paintings. And so the importance of an artist in society was really, the seed was planted there unknowingly. It was something I realized, later in life, that the Smithsonian. Did you
try your hand at any other media before you fell into filmmaking?
No,
Were you into photography?
I was into photography. I was very much into photography. And I would say Mrs. Kraft in high school, she helped a lot because I was allowed to skip class. I could skip some of my other classes if I was printing. I would go to her photography class. If I was in the darkroom printing, she wouldn't narc me out. Mm-hmm. And she helped me develop. And what happened there, I became a documentary photographer, which is kind of like what we were talking about earlier a little bit about cinema verite, is that verite works when you're with people that you are super comfortable with. And so once a photographer hangs around with you all the time, and he just picks his camera up and shoots once in a while, you really are capturing a moment. And that's what happened in high school. Me and my friends, we were like this crazy group, right? And I always had my camera with me, and I would shoot all these parties that we would have, and nobody had access to that. So when she saw those pictures, she was like, can we put these in the yearbook? And so that was like my first publication and my first realization that if you were inside like a group or a circle, or you could penetrate somewhere to be accepted, you could actually you could tell a story there. And that was like my first foray into photography. And then from there, I was like in DC, and then I was going to go to Richmond to VCU for like filmmaking. And it was basically, I was still pretty out of control, 17, 18, something like that. And my dad, he would send a military recruiter to the house every day. Navy, Army, Air Force, Foreign Legion, Coast Guard. Hey, Dad, so you're interested in joining? And I was just like,
that's what he wanted for
I'm
you,
like
huh?
doing like a bong hit, I mean, he was a Marine, but he was like totally not a military guy. He just did it to get away from his stepfather when he was young. He joined the Marines when he was young. He was more like, yo, man, you got to do something. You think you're just going to sit around here and like smoke weed all day? You're not. You do something. And so he forced me into this corner, and the only thing that I knew how to do that I even remotely liked at all was photography. My brother went to FIT in New York for clothes. You know, he was a fashion designer, and my sister was a dancer. She'd gone to Jacob's Pillow. She was, you know, dancing out in Santa Fe, and then ended up in Sevilla with a flamenco dancer. And so I was like, photography. And then I started doing it. I wasn't very good at it. And then one day I do remember the picture I took. It was like a homeless guy on the side of the road with my Nikon with the 105 on it. And when I printed it, I was like, oh man, this looks like a photograph. You know, I'll never forget that moment. I was like, wow, this looks like a photograph you'd see in a magazine or something. It was like, I was like, okay, this might be possible. It was like the possibility in that moment had really hit me. And then I transferred. I was like, I had to go to like some community college, get my portfolio together. It was like a lot of artwork to do also, which I wasn't very good at.
So you thought at the time you wanted to be a still photographer?
Yeah. I worked as a still photographer for a while. And then, you know, I went down to South Florida because they built all the studios there. It was supposed to be Hollywood East, this and that. I took a class on filmmaking. I got totally enamored with, you know, the Panavision camera and the dolly. And I was going to be a still photographer on set.
Oh.
But then I just got cray with the motion picture and shifted over to...
Did you love movies at the time? Would you go to the movies a lot?
Rumblefish was the film that really... Coppola.
Francis Ford Coppola, yeah.
Yeah, the black and white. There was so much weird projection there and time lapses and Mickey... And it was all about bad boys. Matt Dillon basically ruined me as a teenager. All he did was play, you know, the anti-hero bad boy on motorcycles. So that was it. That was like my entire upbringing.
And so watching a film like that made you think like this is the possibilities of this medium is something that you wanted to pursue?
No, I didn't think like that. I was much more like, because I came up as an assistant, so it was much more loader, second AC, first AC, and then operator. And
this
then
is AC means assistant camera.
Yeah.
And second, there's a hierarchy in the film world. That's Francis Ford Coppola. I had the great opportunity to work for him on a movie called Jack. Not his greatest achievement in life, but still got to see this kind of master at work, working in the art department when I was like 19, and he used to say that filmmaking is one of the last remaining true dictatorships. There's no democracy in filmmaking. It is pure hierarchy.
That's true.
And the difference, it's something I think about all the time because my tendencies are more anarchist, more liberal, more progressive, but I also try and see the appeal of the other side, right? And what is it about? You know, you don't want to vilify half the population, right? And I think one of the main differences between the right and the left and progressive and conservative points of view is this idea of hierarchy being something that's important or not. You know, like the more egalitarian political philosophy or attitude is one of saying, you know, we should not have hierarchies of power, of authority. There's no reason one individual should be able to exert, you know, especially violent authority over another, right?
Yeah.
But not just that in everything. Like if you look at, power. If you look at like, you know, a corporation, it's very hierarchical and it's very efficient for that reason, right? But also art has to have a certain hierarchy. It has to have somebody who's got a vision, and it has to be done, especially in filmmaking. It has to be done efficiently. It has to be done with great, you know, it's almost like a military operation, right?
It's 100% military. And if you don't have the vision of the director, if the director is weak and doesn't have a vision, the film goes. Everything in the film industry, look, if you're on a big job, it's very military and hierarchy. If you have a egalitarian kind of like concept there, you're not going to get anything done.
Yeah.
Everybody has an
opinion. Can't get consensus.
You're not going to get consensus because each individual has been raised in a different home. And that's basically, we're just living our childhood over and over. Our 7-year-old self is basically running ourselves, you know? So you got all these 7-year-olds trying to say, it should be like this because my teacher said this when it's never going to work. And so you have a strong director in there. I hate working without a strong director. You know, that without a vision and they're looking to me, I'm not here to piggyback you. I'm here to collaborate with you.
And it's so
you
interesting.
know?
Like if you look at one of my big influences was Vittorio Storaro, who was a great cinematographer, won 3 Academy Awards. And it's so interesting if you see his work when he worked with a very strong director like Bertolucci, like Coppola, like his work was the best of the best.
Yeah.
But when he worked with weaker directors like Carlos Saura, or all of a sudden, you could see there wasn't anybody kind of imposing their will on him, and he went a little.
And he went too far.
Hopefully, he won't listen to this because he's mad respect. He's a mentor and like amazing. But between us and whoever's listening, Storaro lost his way when he didn't have a strong director.
Yeah,
and
too much free will.
Interesting, right?
And then he's not. Then he's less cinematographer and he's more director, and that's not what we're. That's not our job there.
So that's what's so interesting is that as people who love Bombay Beach is like, you know, it's about hippie freedom, about we also acknowledge that there's this other world in which hierarchy and authority are really important, right?
Imagine
and so how do you square those two things in your head?
I square it as I'm here to collaborate. Like, let's say we go and you say, I want to do it like this. I'm going to say, okay, you know, that I want to do it like that also. And, you know, here's an option. So like every DP, if you sulk, if you give a suggestion and you get shot down and you sulk, you're not going to work. I mean, you have to be able to give a suggestion, have somebody tell you there's no fucking way we're going to do that, you know, or that's stupid, or we can't do that, or absolutely not. You just have to be like, no problem. Next.
It's very Buddhist in that way. You have to let go.
You just have to step aside and let your ego just like pass you by right there and keep going. Because if you like get your feelings hurt or, you know, your ego damaged or something like that, you're not going to work, because your job is to grab the vision of the director and then make it a visual. You know, how do you take the vision out of this person's head and actually put it on screen? And so there is absolutely a collaboration, production designer, DP, you know, all the different department heads, the editor, they're all working together for one thing, but that director is 100% the captain and the final say. And
then as a director, I must say that there is an authority above us, and that is the film itself.
And the producer.
Yeah, no, but let's say you're producing and directing, and the buck stops at you. Then you have to still subsume yourself and your ego.
That's right.
To the project and the truth that you're trying to like reveal. So there is this hierarchy all the way up to the, you know, this hopefully great thing that
the film itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they always say that like a documentary is not the truth; it's the director's truth about that subject. It's not necessarily the truth of the subject. It's the director's truth of that subject, how they see it. Well, yeah, and how they choose to tell that story.
And then the artist, you know, you could also say the artist has some role in creating or revealing a truth that wouldn't otherwise be there. It's not like there's a truth and then you discover it. It's like the cinema verite thing we were talking about. Yeah. But you're also revealing something, hopefully shedding new light on it, literally, right? Yeah. On a subject. Do you prefer doing documentaries or do you prefer doing fiction?
I prefer, it's like it, sometimes I found myself doing more documentary work, but I think I prefer narrative feature. I love the storytelling aspect of it. I used to be scared of it, then I realized like the lighting of a feature film, but then I realized, oh, you're really just doing the same lighting. You know, you're lighting for what you think that is. But I came from documentary more, and there you have to walk in, assess the situation so fast. Documentary makes you a great cinematographer because you have to make so many decisions immediately, and you have to direct from behind the lens a lot in order. You're really being a storyteller there through the lens. And the thing I like about documentary is I've been in so many rooms that I would never, ever, ever be in. Mm-hmm. Once you have the camera in your hand, they just say, where do you want to be? And you just go to the front to the best position of no matter where you are. And that is an amazing kind of like pass right to the front line, whether it's the sideline of the Super Bowl or in the White House or a Navajo woman's hut out in the middle of New Mexico. And just you meet so many people that in life you would just never, ever, ever come across them.
Yeah.
And it makes you such a fuller person, a global, citizen. I've shot on 6 continents and, maybe 60 countries. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
I see, obviously I share also this love of documentation and of photography and cinematography.
Yeah.
And I think that as a medium for getting to know the world, as a curious person,
Yes.
there's nothing better, right?
There's nothing better.
Like and even this is a form of that, right? We're shooting,
Mhm.
we're talking to each other, we're taking the time to dig deeper into a subject with, in this case, is each other, but
Mhm.
whatever it is, it becomes this literal medium, like a thing that is a tool for opening up something and peering inside. I do
Yeah.
think you're right that we're just very lucky to like have this as a way of life compared to like someone who goes to an office every day and experiences the same thing. It's just,
Oh my
I
God.
can't imagine.
I've never been to the same set twice.
Right.
And it's been 25 years of freelancing. How does somebody call me every month for 25 years? That seems insane, right? Raise 3 kids.
No, I've watched
as a freelancer.
Yeah.
It just seems crazy. But it happened, and it's still happening. And I've literally never been to the same set twice. And that's so refreshing. My mom says, well, what exactly do you do for a living? And I was like, Ma, just imagine that you put all your stuff into a truck and then you drive it somewhere and you take it all out and then you do you move it around a bunch and then you load it back up and then you drive it somewhere else and you do the same thing in a different place the next day. It's just like, that's it. You're kind of out there. And that's the beauty of filmmaking, is that you start with absolutely nothing. There's a group of people together, especially international, or just a bunch of people that you don't even know. Like a lot of times you have your own crew, but a lot of times you don't. And you're like, okay, we're starting with 0 and this is our goal. And we're going to absolutely just create something. And by the end of the day, something is 100% created. And it's rare that a job offers that you have a real sense of accomplishment, that something was created that day.
But my favorite, I've talked about him once on the podcast before, but so forgive me if you've heard this, but Walter Murch, who's like the greatest editor and sound designer in the history of cinema, did a lot of Coppola's films. He's also, I think, the greatest intellectual thinking and writing about film that I've ever read. And so if you can read or listen to anything that Walter Murch has to say, I highly recommend it. And he said, we've been building houses for tens of thousands of years. It's the thing that we've done the most as a species, right?
Shelter. Mm-hmm.
Shelter. There's nothing that's been done more and for longer and all over the world, and it's so universal. Now, find me one builder who tells me how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost and actually sticks with it. It doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Like, you cannot find someone who will build your house and tell you it's going to take 60 days and it's going to cost X amount. Now, filmmaking, we've only done it for less than 100 years. It's way, way, way more complicated than making a house. There are way more moving parts. There's so many. There's a crew of 100 people. Mm-hmm. There's all this stuff. Now, you're going to stick to your budget and you're going to stick to your timeline. And if you don't, you're never doing this again.
That's true.
And it's amazing that for him, that shows that it's like the pinnacle of human accomplishment. Like the fact that 100 people can get together and aim for this thing.
Yeah.
And this is why Vittorio Storaro used to tell me, like, I will never say anything bad about any movie. They used to watch, when I worked for him, like his whole crew would, even if it was after working a 12-hour day, they'd go to the movies afterwards. Mm-hmm. And they just watch everything that came out.
Right.
Like anything that's in the cinema, they'll have seen it.
Right.
And anything that they'll have seen, they'll have learned something from. Because they say, if you know how to make movies made, you will find it way presumptuous to criticize it.
It's true.
Because people watch the movie and they're like, oh, it was a little long, or, I would have done this differently. Like, but when you realize what goes into making a movie and how many people who've dedicated their lives in ways that few people dedicate their lives to a single thing, because most people go to a job 9 to 5, or they have a hobby, they do a few hours a day. If you're making a movie, especially in American cinema, like they work harder than anybody. It's like
you're going 7 to 9. Yeah. 15, 16-hour days.
Sometimes 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week.
Yeah, TV shows.
And like even people who are huge stars, I've gotten to work with, Warren Beatty, all these. It's the dedication and the work that needs to go into this is just unbelievable.
It is not for the faint of heart.
No.
I mean, there are people leaving LA all the time. Just couldn't make it.
Yeah.
There's furniture everywhere. People come out there to make it, and it is brutal between the competition and who you have to be. Like, I've transitioned a bit in the last decade of my life with some real estate and, moving into some other areas of interest, in my life. And every time I'm outside of the film industry and I interact with, what do you call them, civilians? And when I interact with civilians, I'm just like, why am I paying you? I was like, film people are the most efficient. They have the most common sense. They're the best problem solvers. They're so succinct in everything they do. They move quickly. They think quickly. They problem solve. Regular civilians, they're kind of like useless to us. Like, as I interact with them, for the property management or something like that, I'm just like, I can replace you with a phone call. It's a different film industry people they're a different breed of people. That's it. They just.
So how do you square philosophically like this idea that an artist, again, we are people who are pushing boundaries all the time. We're attracted to the desert. We're attracted to this like much more bohemian lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We're questioning everything. There is this kind of boundary pushing, anti-hierarchical attitude that I think we share, and at the same time, this embrace of this total military style, hierarchical, do things exactly the way I say. Like, how does that coexist in your head?
I see them as kind of like two different things. One is more almost like work, like when you're on the job, it has to be look, the dolly that we use for the camera, it was used to load the bombs into the plane, the hydraulics, and the camera, it was the gun. And with the whirl head on it, and that was for
metaphors
the B-52
too. Shooting.
It was
we're shooting.
And you're shooting.
And
you have to move. 60 to 100 people. You have to feed them. You have to stay online. You need base camp. You have to have communication. I mean, it's a very military kind of operation, and you just accept it. You show up. There's catering, and it's great. And then you go to your department and you discuss with your team what's going to happen. And then you stay in radio contact all day, and you execute. And there's everybody's listening and following the chain of command.
It's also very male dominated. This is the other way that it's kind of a little regressive. It's a little, not very. It's not progressive. And luckily that's changing a little bit.
It's changing a lot. Yeah,
but there's
the whole world has been male dominated, and historically.
But in film even more.
But historically, the world has been male dominated, and terrible decisions.
I think
every bad thing that's ever happened historically, a man made that decision.
And Walter Murch, I think it was Walter Murch who said that the reason women were allowed into editing is that there's this primordial idea that like the man is going out and shooting, literally hunting, and the woman is like cooking it at home, right? Like she's like, and it's like not recognized, even though it's the most important thing in film is editing, possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to the cinematographers, but I think.
Well, they say that you make the film on set and then you make it again in the editing room.
Yeah.
But they also say that if the film isn't made before you get to day one, you're fucked. The film has to be done in pre-production. It's basically done, and then you just get to set and have fun, and you're just like painting by colors. But there's so many different styles of filmmaking and styles of shooting, and big crews and small crews. I mean, we were talking about Easy Rider at the pool last night, and the guy, because they were talking about motorcycles, and I was like, the most important thing about Easy Rider is it created this low budget. It basically, the studios said, yo, these 10 people with a freaking Bolex just made millions of dollars, and so why don't we get out of the studios and give some of these young filmmakers, Lucas, Coppola, Borman, like, why don't we give some of these young filmmakers these cameras and some budget and see what they can make? And then you've just got the most ridiculous cinema, throughout the 70s, up until Jaws, when it became all about the box office. That was the first time a film was released nationwide at the same time, in theaters all at the same time, and it was the first time they reported box office earnings.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that was it. And the independent film movement, that was kind of over. It became,
died.
Marvel.
And the 70s died and became the 80s, and like all of the idealism of the 60s and 70s kind of went by the wayside and replaced by greed and
yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, it is.
It's interesting because now we're kind of revisiting, I think, in a much more nuanced way, some of the same goals and ideals of the 60s and 70s.
It's coming back around. I mean, to answer the question before, like, how do I, like, what's the philosophy of that in my mind? It's that when you're at work, it works. You know, it works, and you can do. There's no reason to reinvent it. It's already been established for 100 years, and it works, and that's just the way it goes. I don't really question it that much. I like it. You know, I directed for a while, and you have to make all the decisions and this and that. I did it just to earn enough money to get the real estate, right? And then I just went back to shooting because I prefer. You know, as a freelancer, you have this concept that you're like a hired gun, basically. Mm-hmm. You're hired. That's it. You come in, you shoot. And then you go on, where the director is there way before in pre-production and way after. I'm just a little bit before and after. It was like I do my job and I go and I move on to something else. And you have like a stable of directors that, you know, not all the horses run at the same time. So you have to have enough horses in the stable because, you know, to keep working.
My great grandfather was very old fashioned Italian prince that could have been. He lived until the 1950s, but he might as well have lived in the 1500s. He's still dressed in the old-fashioned. And he had this butler who he couldn't live without. Like, he dressed him, he drove him around, he cooked for him. Like, there was just nothing that he could. Every once in a while, they'd have a fight, and he would, like, fire him. And then my great-grandfather couldn't leave his room for 3 days. And then they'd have to make up. And they were so codependent. And one day they were marching. There was a communist kind of march in the streets of the small town of Vignanello. Mm. And one of the things that they were asking for, and they had like placards, there was this great injustice about when it was a subordinate working for the boss, they would have to say lei, which is the formal, like vous in French or usted in Spanish. Mm-hmm. But the other way around, it was tu, which is like what you'd say to a kid or what you'd say to. And this was one of the things that they were protesting. And my great grandfather looked in horror to his butler and said, "Are you going to start saying tu to me, the informal, right?" And he said, "Absolutely not, because any pleasure I could possibly get from saying tu to you would be completely obliterated by hearing the assistant butler say tu to me." So when you have these kind of hierarchies, they're steeped all the way down, you know? Yes. So even, and it is this kind of flexing of power, of male dominance, and some great things have come out of that, obviously. I mean, look at the great military victories and empires built and cathedrals built and fantastic movies made. But I'm just I'm just curious about this because of this Coppola idea of like, it's the last remaining true dictatorship. Like, we wouldn't embrace it in politics anymore, but within an art form, we accept this idea of like domination, hierarchy for the end of this like art piece, right?
Yeah, okay, domination for creativity. It's not domination for control or domination of another person. It's not, you know, I work mostly in conscious media now, and I really like that because I'm going to benefit. I'm using my tools that I've honed over, 20 years as in benefit of somebody else, somebody I don't even know. I like that. I
don't know. I'm going to take issue with you that. Like, when I worked for Dean Tavoularis, like there was domination as human. Like I would get screamed at so hard that I would like go home crying. Right.
That happens.
And now
also.
I feel like I've like, I wear it as a badge of honor, having been through it as a hazing kind of mentality, like a fraternity type thing. Yeah.
That's not cool anymore. That was a way of life for a long time. It doesn't happen that much anymore. It's not that cool. But what I was saying before is that there can be domination, but the domination ultimately is for the creation of art.
Yeah.
Okay, it's for the film. Yeah. It's not to occupy another country or put somebody down. It's not domination to make somebody lower than us. It's domination for a creative reason.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can fall into line. Nobody's going to fall into line if we're making propaganda for the Lenny Riefenstahl's film. It's like you're not gonna go for it like that. It's a different type of domination. It's creative domination.
Yeah,
is the ultimate point is art. Now, like when we're out in Bombay, is there hierarchy out there? I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed the most was community.
Exactly. That's the antithesis in a way.
Right. So there's like, we have this WhatsApp group, going on. Somebody needs help. There's like, somebody's like, I need help. And everybody's like, I'm on it, and then they come over, and then the dinners we would have at night, and everybody was kind of like out doing their thing in the day or collaborating a little bit. And then sometimes like, you would need something and you would be in charge there, and we would come over and help. But then, Cody or I would need something, and then we would be in charge and other people would help. So it changed also. Hierarchy had the ability to change out there, and different people would be able to lead and be in charge.
So when we met, I was very obsessed with this idea of democratizing filmmaking, right? There was this growing up, cameras, film was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into filmmaking in college, the idea of buying a 16 millimeter camera was the peak of what I wanted and hoped for. And it was like, I remember several $1,000s even to get an old Bolex. Then you have to think about developing it. So then you're suddenly answering to the powers that be and creating something that has to be a commercial enterprise in a way. And then digital video came out, and there was this real excitement about it being more like another art form, like
mm-hmm.
a painter that's alone with the paintbrush. And you could pick up a camera and just do something without thinking about money, without thinking about huge crews, without thinking about all this. So when I met you, I was living in this school bus,
mm-hmm.
and we had this quote of Jean Cocteau on the side, written on the side, and it said, "Film will only become art when its materials are as inexpensive as pencil and paper."
Yeah.
And I think, I kind of asked these questions to you earlier thinking that I didn't know the answer, but I'm zeroing in on, I think that there are elements of that kind of the hierarchy and old-fashioned way of making movies that we obviously have had to embrace and go through. But I do think that there is a new approach that is much more anarchic, a lot more, and we've done that together in a lot of ways. Like we've made a movie called Fix, right? It was just a crew of a few people with a bus going around, and again, I don't know what the place is of, I don't think we're going to figure it out in this conversation, but we can try a little bit, like where the vision has to be singular, and where does this collaborative idea come in, and where does this kind of more democratic, more boundary pushing element come in a medium like filmmaking that is collaborative. And then we could try and talk about it in regards to Bombay Beach and stuff. But we've go ahead.
We've always been independent. Like when you're dealing on look, you can break the rule to everything in cinema. People go and make, very cinematic pieces with a small crew. I mean, Kubrick was famous for a small crew and more days. He wanted more time, and he had a smaller crew, and he would save his budget like that. And then, you got 150 people on the commercial for a 30-second spot, or, they spend 6 or 8 months making a feature film. It's a grueling process, but there's always exceptions to every cause. We always stayed small. We always stayed independent. I'm thankful to have been able to work for that long in that field also. A lot of people are amazed at my career that, like, how do you have so many interesting jobs for so long? And it groomed me for what's happening now, actually. You don't need a big truck. You need a van or a station wagon. And you need to be able to outsmart your gear. All the concepts of lighting are the same. This is the key light. There's a backlight over there. It doesn't matter if you've got a 20K or a window. The principles are the same, right? So there's a lot of great life philosophies, in the film industry like that. And all the principles and, who you are as a character and your value and your principles, that they all stay the same. And so you can make something. Where does the democracy come in? I think the democracy comes in where people say, oh, I like that vision. And I want to be a part of that. How do we help make that happen?
Yeah.
There's where you get the collaboration. The guy's still in charge. And sometimes people make suggestions. I mean, people are making suggestions on set all the time. Normally you're not really supposed to, but it depends who the director is. If the director is open to suggestions, and if you're okay getting shot down, then somebody can come up with something that may not get used, but will lead to something better.
A big lesson I learned, a big mentor of mine has been Oliver Stone, and I've been really lucky to get to know him and work with him, and both, as a friend and as a filmmaker. And I was amazed because he's so known for being such a alpha male and, kind of belligerent and, really has his unique view, but he was always asking everybody their opinion and listening. And then I remember every time even a PA would come in, a production assistant would come in and just have some concern or something they had to deal with, I never once saw Oliver Stone say, have somebody else deal with this. This is not my responsibility.
Right.
Everything was his responsibility.
Right.
And everything got his undivided attention.
Yes.
If it was an administrative issue, if it was like, and I had this flash of like, wow. Like I remember seeing my ex-wife, worked with many different directors, and I would hear like about, their processes. And I was always asking a million questions about like what worked and what didn't. And I a picture starts to emerge about what films are going to come out badly,
right,
and why. And I think when people rest on their laurels, don't pay enough attention to detail, and, farm out too much to other people and don't have this kind of all encompassing vision, the movie suffers. Sometimes it's a miracle that you see a movie gets made at all, right? There's so many parts that have to come into position. And then what does it depend on whether the movie actually comes out to be good or not? And it's like, it seems on one hand, an almost arbitrary luck that all these things happen well. But then when you work with people who realize that every detail is part of what makes that whole.
That's right.
And there's nothing that's insignificant.
There's nothing that's insignificant. That's a very important thing. And each director is very different. I was fortunate enough to work with Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, in their early careers as well. And I mean, singular vision. These guys know exactly what they're going for. That the story is so done in their head. They're 100% sure of it. But, the grip electric and camera department, it's the same crew over and over and over. So it's a family.
Right.
So sometimes guys are yelling out, why don't you do it like, and they're like, oh yeah, let's try it like that. Because they're so confident in themselves that if they hear an idea, and it's not an idea from somebody they don't know, it's an idea from people that you've been in the trenches with. That's the thing about filmmaking is like, it's like war. And when you've gone through some heavy stuff with these people, they can say or do whatever they want. You can break rank there. There's always.
It occurs to me that you could have this super non-hierarchical way of life, let's say in a tribe, and that's like, we talk to people like Christopher Ryan and in Monogamish, and think about, this more tribal, egalitarian way of living. But when another tribe attacks, then you're going to have to put some of that away and focus on whatever it takes to get it done. And I think making the film is this kind of family feeling, but the family is suddenly being attacked and you're having to like go into emergency and defend yourself
against production of like having to see. That's hilarious. Filmmaking is being attacked. You have to react. You have to react to you basically have to react. When people ask me what I do for a living, I say I create art under phenomenal time pressure.
Exactly.
It's like you're being attacked by the clock. Basically, money and time are attacking you, and you have to defend yourself against them in creativity.
The other big difference between conservative and progressive viewpoints is the conservative's more nationalistic. It's our tribe is better than your tribe, right? The progressive view is always like, no, you criticize your own tribe. You try and find as an American progressive, you're criticizing your own government. You're looking for the flaws
to make them better.
To try and make them better. And the conservatives saying, no, our flag is the best and our way of life is better. And it's funny that I think when you're in this war mode, you got to put aside the self-criticism because you're going to win the war, right? And I think it's the same sort of thing. Like the reason you have to embrace the hierarchy in this family, in this tribe, is that you're in this emergency state. You've got this money that's being spent faster than ever. You've got all the weight of the world on your shoulders. Yeah. And
I've never thought about it like that, but it's actually true. Like the feeling of being attacked, it is. You have to
or
defend
being
yourself.
on this, or
It's
being
like,
on this. Yeah, you're in emergency, like
you're in emergency mode
mode.
because you show up and they're like, "Okay, guys," it comes across the radio. It's like, breakfast RTS ready to serve 6:30, 7 a.m. working, and it's like as soon as that starts, it is. You're like in emergency mode. Everybody's highly, highly focused.
Yeah.
Everybody's on point and just ready to go. They're the utility belts. And
Yep. I remember there was the guy, a set decorator when I worked for Dean Tavares, and it was the great production designer who was screaming at me all the time. And I remember just being so shaken by being, just railed into for something that had nothing that I couldn't have done anything about. And there was this very kind set decorator, Armin Gantz was his name. He actually died, but he came up to me and he's like, "Tao, I'm 19 years old," and he says, "There are very few situations in the world where there's this much pressure and this much money on the line being spent this quickly and so many things. So just be aware that it's not about you."
Right.
Like there is just tremendous pressure.
That's tremendous
and
pressure.
people are going to deal with that in different ways.
Right.
And that was a huge, learning experience for me.
It's true. And some people are just like that also. One of the first big films I did that helped me get to LA was Michael Chapman was the DP, and the camera department had come from LA, and I was a local, in Florida. And as the local there, I mean, the camera department, they just treated me like just shit. I mean, and on top of it, there was a lot of nepotism going on there. Like I was the loader, and the second was the operator's nephew or something like that. But he wasn't very good, and so I was like, I was a better assistant than him. And then they fired him and gave me his position and moved him down to loader, and I became the second, and that was just terrible.
Why?
Because they just made them hate me like even more. They were harder on me, and it can be difficult to you can get hazed like that. I mean, I was totally getting hazed, but the sound guys totally embrace me, and it kind of made that film okay. Normally you would always hang with your department, but I was like an outsider there. Like these LA guys came in, I was the local, they hazed me, but the sound guys took me in. It ended up being an amazing experience and one of my funnest films ever. And from that, the producer was like, "Why do you live here? You're good enough to work in LA. You come out there and live with me." And I was like, "Okay." And then I moved 2 weeks later.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on outside of filmmaking on maleness, because we've talked about being like brothers. We talked about the kind of fraternity like atmosphere of these boys getting together with their cameras to go shoot. And I think there's also this hierarchy in film world about there's a beautiful kind of mentorship thing that happens, the kind of a paternalistic, people could rise up as interns and rise through the ranks and everything.
That's
and
huge.
I think it's a very tricky and interesting time to be a man, because all of these things are being questioned in our society, rightly so, because again, we want to uproot this more kind of violent, primitive domination. But I just think it's interesting. We're like two men, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, kind of want to embrace our maleness and our alphaness, but at the same time be sensitive contemporary humans.
I think it's possible.
And so how? What have you learned? I know you've done a lot of films also with these interesting kind of more conscious subjects.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you think about being a man in this day and age, both in the career you've had and from what you've learned in your spiritual practice and
Well, it's a big concept, so I guess I'll just say whatever comes to my mind first.
Yes,
if
please.
I think about it, it's not going to happen. So what about being a man? Well, for me, being a man, I guess the first thing is being a parent, maybe, and husband and father. That to me, it really symbolizes with a man, you're responsible for people. Do not let these people die. Keep them fed, give them shelter, education. And my concept as a man for my boys, because I have 3 boys, is I'm just here to make good humans. I don't care what you do for a living. If we build good humans based on principles, virtues, character, like these important things, that no matter what you do, you'll be fine out there. A spiritual practice, just a holistic approach, diet, what can you teach them in the house that when they get out there, they'll be fine on themselves, and it doesn't matter what field they'll be in, because the roots are really important.
Was your approach in fathering, because again, this is a place where very deep-seated metaphor exists for broader political ideas, like, were you strict? Do you believe that you need to have discipline and authority, or do you believe the kids should like fend for themselves and find their way? And
there's a fine line there. I think at the beginning, in my own immaturity, I was probably too strict, like too much like tough love like that. And I don't think that works. I was doing it, and then I it doesn't work, and you come around it. I mean, ultimately, people are always like, love, heals everything. Love does heal everything. If you can be more compassionate and more loving, it is way easier. And just trying to be more understanding. And like one of the biggest things I probably learned is, how do you surrender? Like sometimes you just have to, like, it's anti-male thinking. Surrender? I'm not French. It's like, I'm not, but surrendering like to who you are, and surrendering to the situation, and how can I be softer? How can I be more loving? How can this technique is not getting through. I always thought that historically, we have a terrible historical, pattern. With every bad decision, every horrible thing that ever happened, man had made that decision. And I do wish that, more women were in charge, and we need more feminine energy. So like as a man,
do you try and find the feminine energy inside yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mostly just around surrendering and allowing it to unfold and accepting, and, through like a meditation practice, through a spiritual practice, there's man for me is a man-woman combination, yin yang, right? There's part of me that's super alpha. I'm a super alpha male. I can be, right? And the other part of me wants to absolutely not be alpha, wants to be taken care of. It's exhausting to be in charge of a family and kids and the finances and the cars and the housing and all that stuff. I mean, it's just exhausting. You don't want to be in charge anymore. You want somebody to take care of you. You have all these huge, powerful men that get busted by being spanked or, by women, because they don't want to be in charge. They want to be dominated. There's part of us that we're just dominating things constantly. And at some point, can somebody please can I not be in charge? I don't want to be in charge. And that's part of like man's role, is that you end up in the family. Now things are different, but historically man has been in charge. And so like, how do I balance those two things? I mean, the alphas sometimes, especially with women, they love that. Women that are attracted to me, they love that part of me, that kind of like dominating, masculine and physical, the part of me. And then there's also like the feminine part, where you have to like be soft. You can't be like that all the time.
Yeah.
It's like a race car. You just can't be racing all the time. You got to come in, you got to pit it for a second. You need to relax and chill. You have to find balance. The Yin Yang Theory for me is kind of like the whole thing. It's like, it's the same thing. There's one mountain.
Yeah. One
side has snow on it. The other side gets the sun on it. No snow, but it's the same mountain. One side is cold, one side is warm, but it's still the same, the whole of the same mountain. It seems separate, but it's not. And I think that historically, a male does not accept its feminine side. And there is a great error there.
It's interesting because I had
softness.
I had a very, distant father, so I would always find father figures in other scenarios, and especially in the film business, because I could find these kind of powerful male figures that were successful and easy to look up to, whether it was Dean Tavoleras or Storaro, and like I said, we have a big brother, little brothers type thing. Like, what I've seen in the people I really admire has been, yes, an ability to take charge, yes, an ability to take responsibility, but always the thing that distinguished the really top guy from the guy right underneath him that you could see was never going to make it to the top was an openness to learning always, a humility to say, I don't know the answer necessarily right now, and a a kind of receptivity, right? Like
Yeah.
I remember Vittorio Storaro would show up on the set every day, excited and open to not to learning from everybody around him,
Yeah.
you know? And to me, like, that's where I think you've got to find that balance, is like to stay humble and open and receptive to knowing that there's bigger things than you. It's like the film is bigger than you because nobody cares about you. If your ego is in there, film's gonna suck, right? Like you're looking for this truth, and you're working with people who know a lot more than you. And so, you know, I've always appreciated like having that relationship with you, like of like, Gallo knows how to make this look better than I do. So
right. Well,
it's
the team, you know, it's really important who you collaborate with,
and then having those deep conversations. That collaboration is beautiful. Like when we sit down in the morning and say, okay, what's the best way to look at this? And you have to listen, right? You have to listen and say, like, I don't know everything, and hopefully this person is going to bring out the best of this project that neither of us as individuals would do. And I've felt that all the time on everything we've done together, you know?
Yeah. Thank you. Me too. Yeah. No, I love you. I love it. You know, I wish we were still doing, you know, more projects.
We are. We're just doing different projects.
Yeah, it's true. We've shifted into different areas.
Here's one.
Yeah, here's one right now. But I do think that the word surrender is important for men.
Yeah.
To just, you know, be open to it and let go a little bit. And, you know, my own spiritual practice has helped a lot. And I've really chosen to work only on conscious media now. And I leave the set so full and smarter and more educated and wiser. And then
that's been the best thing about going off on these adventures together. Because we made a movie, Monogamish, another one, Being in the World, where we just go out and talk to people who are way smarter than either of us and just listen to what they have to say for an hour. And just that, setting aside all of the technical things and how it's going to turn into a movie, like just being able to sit down and listen to these people is
amazing.
Such an incredible blessing. Right?
And afterwards, I love the idea that my craft has somehow influenced somebody else's life in a positive way.
Right.
And I have no idea who that person is. And that's the power. It's like you're taking the most powerful tool of communication, filmmaking, right? And you're using your craft to alter the life of somebody else in a positive way. That to me is really important and fulfilling and gets me very excited to go to work.
So if you had a young person now, like, you know, high school or college, wants to be a filmmaker, wants to be, you know, is attracted to cinematography, what advice would you give them?
I mean, I think it's probably been the same advice for forever is do it. Don't think about it.
No.
You know, we share the same dentist, Roshi, and we always get the
nitrous oxide. And now she's up and she has the Bose. You know, I listen to meditation music in the Bose, and she has an eye thing and whatnot. And it's like a spiritual experience there. And transcendental.
Transcendental. Exactly.
Sorry, couldn't resist.
That's a good one. And I tell the receptionist, I said, if you hear me yell anything out, write it down. And she's like, you're the weirdest patient ever. So I'm there and I'm like having these like things and I yell out, and she gives me the paper afterwards and it said, thinking about it is not doing it. Right. And it's like something that comes to me like in this like highest state of like meditation and like you're really out there and whatnot. And thinking about it is not doing it. Talking about it is not doing it. Get out there and make as many mistakes as you can. I mean, the iPhone is an unbelievable camera now.
Yeah.
You know, it's really gotten down. It's
no
in your
excuse.
pocket all the time. There's no excuse. Are you a filmmaker? Show me your film. Then you're not a filmmaker. Yeah. A filmmaker makes films. So you either have it in you or you don't. That's it. You can't help yourself. The people that work in the film industry, we're like carnivals. Yeah, it's like a carnival act. They're like carnies. You can't help. What else are you going to do? You can't help it. That's what that's what you do. And really important.
Dean DeValeris had the more crude way of saying it. He said, any fucking asshole has an idea. Let me see it executed.
Yeah.
You know, having an idea that you can sit in your room and have 100 ideas, but taking it from an idea and turning into reality is That's what separates the greats.
I mentor a lot of young kids in photography and in filmmaking from high schools and different things. People ask me to speak, whatever. And I tell them, do you have an opening title? Is there a beginning, a middle, and an end to your story? Was there a problem? It climaxed and then was resolved. And do you have an end? See, you have an end title at the end of it, you know? Congratulations, you made a film. That is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how good or bad it is. That is 100% a success. You have a title, a beginning, a middle, and an end title. That is so difficult that you completed it all the way. Do that 10 more times and see how much better it gets. Everybody's thinking about it and I want to do it and this and that. Just do it. It's hard. Otherwise, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
You know, or everybody would be great at it. And the interesting thing about the phones now and the access to filmmaking is, okay, there's a bazillion films at all the festivals and the whole market is flooded, but some people that, you know, you may not have heard their voice or seen their work, their vision, they have access to, you know, all the studios are YouTube now. You know, there's a million places that you can have your platform to distribute. And you can edit on your, you know, on your phone or on the computer. There's no excuses.
No excuse.
My advice to people is start shooting, start editing. Yeah. Editing is the most important. You want to be a great shooter? Edit your footage.
Yeah.
One of the most important things I learned from you was I wouldn't hold the shot long enough. I would change the frame, you know, and then you would go and edit and you'd be like, dude. And then I would have to come over and watch it. And all of a sudden you'd be like, that's terrible. And then you're just like, well, you can't do that anymore. You can't continue to work and make that mistake like that. And so I remember learning that from you, and this, like, you know, being in the shot longer and holding it, so it makes so when you start editing your footage, you become a great shooter.
Yeah, it's funny when in Francis Ford Coppola, like in Apocalypse Now, he saw the trio that was most responsible for making the movie as like the production designer, the cinematographer, and him, and that's why they had that great scene of the three of them, Storaro, Tavoleras, and Coppola, pretending to be a documentary crew, and they're like, "Don't look at the camera." Like if you've seen the film, that's like their little cameo. And because I've always made much smaller movies where production design has just frankly not been a possibility, because we're not building sets, we're not, you know, we're doing some design, but for me the trio has been me, you, and the editor.
Yeah,
you know, that's the kind of triad that grows, that is kind of cooking this thing together, with everybody else at the service of those three in a way. That's always how it's been in my head. So it's been really fun growing with, you know, the few editors that we've had the longest collaborations with, and like the three of us sitting down and saying, okay, what can we do better? What can we learn from this? And how can we, you know, make the best out of these like situations, like you say, that you need to work with what you have, right?
Yeah.
You have to work with the situation you have, the budget you have. And that's always been a great thing I've learned from you, that you always go as deep as you can. You don't settle for like, oh, it's fine. Like even if we just have this, like let's play with this light, use a board to get a little bit more reflection. Let's spend a few more minutes like getting this right. And so what about the future? Do you have things that you haven't done both cinematically and then in life in general that you know, have as goals for the next 5, 10, 20 years of life?
I'm at a moment right now where I'm really like, you know, Luca was the arrow in the bow, and I pulled it back and raised him. And now just recently, I mean, he's an amazing shooter himself. He's become a director, DP, and editor. Just this last year, it's just exploded. He works all the time. And I mean, he's done. He's cooked. 22 years old. My job as a father is completed. Sebastian, Joaquin, they're you know, everybody's up and running. And so now I have this, like, after 22 years of responsibility, I have this like window of like, you know, there's a space has been created, and what do I choose to put in it is the question. And I'm physically in good shape still. What am I waiting for?
How old are you?
I'm 54. And so, you know, I just spent those months I just spent 33 days in Baja in the van, like complete exploration. It was so incredible. And, you know, then a couple other months in Bombay with you guys. And And I think I'm just gonna I want to live seasonally for a little bit, a couple 2-3 months here and there around the globe. I mean, everything gets old, but I figure a couple 2-3 years of that is would be enjoyable, and just different seasons in different areas, and you just creating community. I love creating community, and Venice has been great. Joshua Tree's been great. Bombay's been great, and like for my work, I only want to do two things anymore. I just want to work in conscious media, which is just, positive, just positive media, positive footage about, altering people's life in a positive way, whether it's through meditation or healing work. I've been super fortunate to work on such interesting jobs throughout my career, and, starting with like Finding Joe and Heal and even Monogamish and Being in the World. And they're very interesting projects. They make you a better, wiser, more intelligent, fulfilled person. And so I'm much more interested in that than in commercials. And the other thing I would do is I love shooting narrative features. So, but not violent. Like, I'm super anti-violence. I don't want to shoot anything. I was offered jobs, but there's a ton of murder work out there. I don't want to work on murder.
Right.
It's like, no, I want to be of like a benefit to society. I want to use my craft to help other people that I don't know, or enlighten them or inspire them. And now I've also started leading this workshop, this Tai Chi workshop with archery. And I did that out of Bombay, 3 times. And that has also been really, like, in meditation, they're like, do the workshop. I'm like, I don't want to do the workshop. But, Source keeps telling me, do the workshop. So I write it out. And then Anna calls me. She's like, I'm curating, do you want to do a workshop? And I'm just like, well, I just finished writing one out. So do I want to? No. But am I going to? Yes. And that's a big part of like just doing it. Do I want to do that? No, I don't. Do I want to do this podcast? No, I don't. But I'm going to. It's interesting. And that's, do I want to do those workshops? Not really. It's uncomfortable. And I need to push myself to where it's uncomfortable all the time so that it becomes comfortable. A lot of people don't want to take that step into uncomfortability because it's uncomfortable, and they never grow.
I think that the most important thing as an artist in any medium, whether it's music or film or this, it's just overcoming that resistance. There's always a million excuses not to do it. And it's always hardest to start.
It's so hard.
Like, sit down and play the piano. The first 5 minutes sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know that on the other side of that, once you're in it, then it's beautiful. And I think if I had advice for people wanting to make films, it's just like, it's the same as you. Just start, and every time you can think of a million reasons not to do it, don't listen to those reasons. Just do it, and realize that it's going to be really much harder to make it come out good than you think, but it's going to get easier as you go through it enough times, right?
Yeah.
So when you pick up an instrument, it sounds like shit for a while. You have to be okay with that for a few months, a few years.
Yeah.
There's always the little rewards that it gives you that make it worthwhile, because you can, even at whatever level you're at, you get the rewardingness of learning, of like making something beautiful. But the beauty is that there's no upper limit to that, and you can keep creating something more and more beautiful.
Going. Yeah. And every time you do something, you gain more experience. The next one is, of course, it's going to be better. You've just got the experience of the first one. It's called failing forward.
Nice.
You have to be able to fail forward and be okay with it. It's like an entrepreneurial like concept. Like, okay, that did not go over well. What can we get from that? What can we never do again? And then you think it's a failure, but it's actually a success. You're like, I'm never going to do that again. That was a completely successful moment, Yeah. Failing forward, just make those mistakes like with the operating. I'm not going to do that anymore. That it seemed terrible.
It took actually a few times of drilling it into you.
Yeah, and then it and then it stops.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Everything takes a few times. You're going to make some bad films. Your first one's probably going to be great. Then you'll have a couple of bad ones, and it's been cool. Thinking about it is not doing it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we've come a long way though since. I mean, we're basically kids in this like Venice school bus, right? Converted school bus, using like tiny, just our video cameras to do stuff.
The DVX-100A.
Yeah, it was little like mini DV camera, and now the phone makes a way better image than that ever would have. And we would spend thousands of dollars trying to get them, for this shitty camera now. So really, there's no reason not
And
to.
we get the adapters to put the Nikon lenses on it. We're always trying to make it look more cinematic, and so that like the shutter was spinning in there. And yeah, we're always pushing, and just that's it. Just you always got to be pushing.
And not get too obsessed with the gear, right? That's a risk for people like us who love technology and cameras. And what's your advice about like becoming, it happens in the music world and in the film world and in photography. You can always think that the reason that you're not doing something great is that you don't have the newest thing, right?
It is a curse. And it, I'm up at the ASC, the clubhouse up there, American Society of Cinematographers, and those guys, they always have great advice, and they say, it's not the camera, it's the cameraman. You give a good cameraman a shitty camera, and he's going to make great images. Give a shitty cameraman a great camera, and he's going to make mediocre images. It's not the camera. If anything, it's the lens. The lens choice is way more important. These people are obsessed with 4K, 6K, 8K. Unless you're doing visual effect work, it doesn't matter. You'd be okay in 2K.
Yeah.
But now this is the way it's just gone. Red kind of like started the whole thing, and it never went away. The two best cameras out there kind of right now out of the box are the Arri. The Arri is amazing, and also Canon, just right out of the box shooting, has some really amazing stuff. There's a ton of amazing cameras out there. Doesn't mean that you need them. A story has nothing to do with the camera.
And you're hearing this from the person whose job it is so primarily technical. And you're the one saying it that's not the most important thing.
It's not the most, look, audiences have proven things over and over and over. What is it? They will accept bad imagery. There has been a million examples of shitty looking footage, but if it's a good story, it doesn't matter. What they will not stand is bad sound.
This is true.
I tell them all the time, you can't have bad sound. You'll lose your audience immediately. You can have bad image all day, or you can replace your image with B-roll.
Yeah.
Or bad story. You can't have bad story. You have to have good story.
Yeah.
Look, my job is to enhance the story. That's it. My lighting should be for psychological reasons, for light and for dark, for good, for evil, for, the lens choice. Is it wider? Is it tighter? There's all these philosophical and reasons that I choose to cover something. Why did I light it this way? Or why did I choose this lens? Or why did I want to be on a dolly? Or why did I want it to be static? Or why did I want it to be handheld? It has to do with the story. Everything I do should be moving the story forward in a way that the viewer has no idea, that they're also getting all of these unconscious clues and signals about a tighter lens or a super wide lens or a very bright something or a shadow something or a quick movement or a static. Mm-hmm. And it should all be moving the story forward. If you're not using if you're using cinematography because you want to do a oneer because you think you're cool, you're not doing it properly. You should be doing a oneer because it's moving the story forward in that moment.
Yeah.
Not because you want to show off that you can do a oneer.
Meaning doing it all in one shot.
Yeah, like a 3 or 4 minute take or something. The cinematography needs to support the story. Otherwise, you're defeating the purpose. Everything is about the story and the vision.
I had a thought, maybe I can put it into words, that the hierarchy we've been talking about, it works if it's the other way around. Instead of trying to dominate what's underneath, it's to support what's above. And that's the sense in which the hierarchy is. If you're working below somebody, if your vision, mm-hmm. if your goal is to help them have their vision come true, and each person thinks of themselves as in service of something higher, maybe that's a way of thinking about hierarchy that's not quite so violent and primitive
and dominating. Yeah, my work is 100%, to a higher purpose, to a higher source. I want it to affect people I don't know in a positive way. I want to affect the story in a way that's unconscious. There's a lot of philosophy, and it doesn't even have to be real. I mean, I think Storaro would come up with all of the emotions for these colors, but he was just basing them on how he felt, not actual.
It's funny. I was just debating whether I should tell that story because one of my first jobs was I was working for Dean Tavoleras, the production designer, and Storaro was the cinematographer, and I speak Italian, and Storaro's English wasn't that great, so he asked me to translate his philosophical telling of the story through a journey of color, right? And he thought that every character should have an arc, which an arc is very important, but you don't think of the arc, in the color
As a
spectrum.
palette, yeah.
And that was amazing that he, and like you said, it was a little bit arbitrary. I remember hearing Bertolucci talk about it, saying like, Storaro thinks like the masculine is orange and yellow, and the feminine is blue. He's like, and in Sheltering Sky, they did that. Like the male character is very, the solar,
Yeah.
and the female character is very lunar. And he's like, I may have thought it was the other way around, but I had to give him this because it was what drove him, right? So I'm not going to fight him on it. And it really, in the end, it doesn't matter, right? Like it's just having a vision and following it through and having some consistency
and moving the story forward. Yeah, it's basing it on that.
All right, Gallo, I think we've been going an hour and a half. Great talking to you. We should do this again. I think we only scratched the surface.
We only scratched the surface. We only talked about cinematography. I feel like our life, our friendship is about so many like different things, and a lot of it around philosophy and life philosophies and, art and creativity. And yeah, it's true though, but it's like just being open. And I think that people also, they feel like they finished their education when they left college. And I kind of,
that's where we've been so lucky.
I feel like that's a real mental flaw if you think that you're educated. It's like right until the end, what can I be learning right up until the end? I'm a flower that's constantly blooming over and over and over, and I didn't get it once. It's just petals are falling off and it's happening again and again, and growing higher and higher and wiser and never really stopping and wanting to just be hungry. I'm still hungry for life and all the interesting things out there. Just the conversations. I'm hungry for the interesting. Yeah. I found as I got older, I am way less tolerant of small talk. Yeah, I've noticed that in the last couple of months. I'm like, I'm just so not tolerant of this. I want to keep.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to keep. Learning and expanding. I think that you share that same kind of like philosophy and lifestyle.
Yep, that's what we're gonna keep trying to do. Anyway, gonna cut it off or we'll go on forever. And my back hurts sitting in this chair. I need a new chair.